Hello there, friends. Good evening. It is April the 8th, and this is Wednesday of Holy Week in the year 2020. On Sunday, we discussed the mob, and we talked about groupthink and the danger of groupthink. On Monday, we discussed the cleansing of the temple and how it's a debt-based system, and we discussed the intrinsic relation between theology and economics and the way that one influences the other. Yesterday, we looked at the passion predictions, and in particular, that carrying one's cross means learning to live in forgiveness with everyone. That's what it means. Now, today, what I'd like to do is a little more personal, as well as tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And that's because, as I'll begin talking about tomorrow night, back in the summer of 2017, I was profoundly affected on the deepest levels of my being and learned at that time to live in this kind of Holy Week life. So I'm not just sharing from intellectual knowledge, but the way I see things, understand, do, and live them. Now, the Gospels, listen very, very, very carefully. It's very important. The Gospels are not chronological. You cannot derive some kind of real strict chronology. There's a basic outline you can frame in them. The second thing is the Gospels record sayings and teachings and events of Jesus' life that have been framed in various ways. But third, what's really important is the Gospels give us almost nothing at all about Jesus' spirituality. They really don't talk about his prayer life. They don't say what he prayed about. They don't give you kind of the how. You with me on this? So we can't really go to the Gospels for an examination of Jesus' interior life. And the fourth Gospel is a theological exploration of the interiority of Jesus. Now, I do think that the Johannine community has a tradition that is perhaps more intimate than that of the public synoptic tradition, which can account for some of the more personal type elements in the fourth gospel, including some of the I am sayings. However, you can't use the fourth gospel to decipher Jesus' interior spirituality. You just can't do it. So once we acknowledge that, we acknowledge that we're not going to fall into the category of mistake made by the 19th century German liberal lives of Jesus, and which, by the way, seems to, well, it has its 20th century counterpart, but in the 19th century in Germany, all the liberals wrote their life of Jesus. And essentially, as it was pointed out, I think it was Henry Cadbury pointed it out, they simply copied themselves and wrote themselves down in a book and called it Jesus. They were just projecting. There's a lot of that today, particularly with regard to Jesus. There's a lot of speculations. I have a number of what I call stupid books on Jesus. You know, Jesus went to India. Jesus studied Buddhism. Jesus was a member of the Dead Sea Scrolls community, and we can prove it, and this and that, and on and on and on. Speculation galore. There's tons of speculation. We're not going to go anywhere near that because there's nothing worthwhile there. What we are going to do, however, is look at an insight found in the Epistle to the Hebrews, which itself does a thinking through precisely what's going on in this business of Jesus' death and dying. Now, one of the things on Sunday, when we talked about Palm Sunday, I said that, I think I said it, I know I just read it in my recent book, but I think I said it there too. We are all persecutors at the cross. We are all the mob. We are all the mob. And later we will become all of us persecutors, but we're the mob. Okay? We go with the flow. We don't want to stick out like a sore thumb because those get cut off, scapegoated, as it were. So we go with this flow, and that includes being willing to participate in institutional sacrificial systems that sacrifice. And on Monday, that was the temple. We saw that the reign of God is quite different, that it's all about forgiveness. And now we want to ask, well, why or how? How is Jesus able to go through what he goes through? How does he manage to get through the crisis of Holy Week? Hebrews chapter 12 begins this way. Therefore, and the therefore has to do with this litany of martyrs in Hebrews 11, that begins with Abel and goes all the way down through prophets and others. And the writer says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, that is, those who've given their life, let us also lay aside every weight. Now, what weight is he talking about? And the sin which clings so closely. Now, what is he talking about? And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. What race is he talking about? Looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our trust, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. This is, to my knowledge, one of the very, very few texts that attributes a motivation to Jesus. Okay? And you can say, well, it's not the historical Jesus. Well, it's fine. But when you look at this, and then you go back and you look at Jesus' teachings, you can see that the author understood something about what got Jesus through this crisis of being scapegoated by the mob, the religious authorities, and crucified as a common criminal. What got him through that? What allowed him to hang in there? The writer says Jesus is the pioneer and perfecter of our trust. What Jesus pioneered and what Jesus perfected was the trust of the Heavenly Father. That's what he did in his humanness. He pioneered it and he perfected it. This business of trust. That's what makes his life so essential to the Christian tradition. It's not as though Jesus' life story, his teachings can somehow be spiritualized out. No, when you put Jesus back in his historical context, you see the power of the person in the context of what's happening. And whereas most Christianity just kindly neuters Jesus and then just kind of fits him in somewhere, and no, Jesus, my friends, is enduring life just like you and I are enduring life. The writer to the Hebrews makes this explicit in chapter 2, and again in chapter 4, and again in chapter 5. There is nothing we go through that the Lord Jesus himself has not been through. And that doesn't mean that he has to have every one of our experiences. What it does mean is that he experiences the fullness of human life. And that includes both joy and suffering, gladness and sorrow, the full orbed reality of what it means to be human. But Jesus is able to proceed as he proceeds because of one thing: the joy set before him. What is it that motivates Jesus' obedience to the Father to perfect that trust? The joy set before him. And what is the joy set before him? In the gospel tradition, it is the promise that the Father will raise him from the dead. The Father is, for Jesus, the resurrection and the life. And he trusts that. Absolutely. The conservative Christians in America, for them, the resurrection of Jesus is some kind of past event that has to be able to be demonstrated with a thousand gazillion apologetics, but it doesn't mean jack shit. And then the liberals, well, there can't be a real physical resurrection because we know better, miracles don't happen, and our physics don't allow it, and yada, 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 and they're full of jack shit. And then you've got all the wonderful liberals out there now with their blogs and their posts and their, oh, let's have conversations, and I'm feeling God abandoned me, and they got all these theodicy questions. Where is God? Well, we don't know where God is. It's a mystery. And they're doing all their bullshit nonsense. And it's all it is, let's get together and we can validate each other's feelings of sadness that God isn't with us. They're not Christians. They don't know Jesus at all if they're doing that. At all. They haven't followed him yet. Because if they did, they would trust the very same promise he trusts, namely that God, because God has raised Jesus from the dead, will raise us from the dead. And at least we have that. He's been raised from the dead. He didn't have that. And he still pioneered trust in the Father, and he still perfected that trust. And he's perfecting that trust in every one of us who listen to him. There is a joy set before us. Life is not a bed of roses. Those that want to do a prosperity gospel, health, wealth, and all that, these folks, this whole anti-false pseudo gospel of American prosperity Christianity, it is coming down, and it is going to come down so hard. You will watch even fundamentalists lose their faith like the stock market dropping. You watch. Because there's Superman, God won't come through. It's inevitable. The liberals have already lost God, even though God has found them and they just don't know it. So it's this enduring the cross. You can endure this because of what the promise is, the promise of the eschatological joy. And for Jesus, as I was mulling over this text, realizing on the cross itself are the inscription, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That's not a title that Jesus accepted. I think he saw a bigger picture. I really, really do. I think he saw himself as the heart of the Father's plan, and thus, in the resurrection of the dead, as the Lord of the universe. That was the joy set before him. And he absolutely listened to the Father because of that. He endured the cross. Folks, crucifixion is hell. I'm going to tell you my own personal story tomorrow and Friday from 2017, the Gethsemane that I went through, and then the crucifixion that I went through. You see, all of us go through crucifixions all the time, but they don't mean anything until we learn how to experience them the same way Jesus did. And that's without vengeance, without anger, but with forgiveness. But we'll get to that later. And so a lot of people, they go through crucifixion all the time. The Spirit's at work in them all the time, but they fail the lesson. I know, because I failed the lesson a lot of times before I finally got it. So he endures this cross, and he despises the shame. There are few things worse to experience in life than to have a community turn against you. Literally, to have everybody turn against you, to have absolutely nobody stand by your side, or very few. It's very difficult to watch as a mob takes away everything that you've worked for and built. And Jesus endures the cross because of the joy set before him. He despises the shame of what he's going through. Nobody said Jesus liked the cross. Anybody that thinks there's any kind of some sense in that is sick. He despised the shame. It doesn't say he despised the pain. It says he despised the shame. He's hanging up there, butt-ass naked, on a cross, exposed for all the world to see as worse than a common criminal, spat upon, shat upon, everything. Worthless dreg. That's all he is. And he knows that's what people think of him. And he still forgives the enemy, others. Still does this. Because that's the Father's will. And that's only the Father's will. So when you are thinking in terms of enduring crucifixion, understand it's not about troubles. The coronavirus is not a cross to carry. Losing your job is not a cross to carry. These are not crosses. These are circumstances that are, just SOL kind of circumstances. That's just the way they are. Carrying your cross is when everybody turns against you. Carrying your cross is when you do the right thing and everybody says you're doing the wrong thing. That's what carrying your cross is. And then carrying your cross the way Jesus carried his cross all the way to the end, enduring it, despising the shame, but forgiving the enemy other for the joy that is set before us. I don't know if this will make sense to many of you. I really don't. It's been my personal experience, and that's why I'm sharing that from this particular passage. I can do all the Greek work in the exegesis and tell you what I think the author is saying, but I think it's far more important that this text has become lived in me, or I in it. I think that's what texts are meant to do in a healthy way. But no matter what you do, remember, you are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Those who've gone before you, who've been through this, who've endured the cross, and they have despised the shame of it, but for the joy set before them, they forgave those who crucified them. Christian history has its witnesses. She really does. They might be few and far between, but she has these lights throughout every century, and they can be found everywhere. From priests and monks and nuns and mystics to bishops and sometimes occasionally even a pope or two, as well as just regular lay folks that are just out there looking to follow Jesus. They're in every century, this cloud of witnesses. I'm surrounded by them right now in my books. So lay aside every weight. Runners run races. They put weights around their legs. They strengthen their legs. But when it's time to run the race, they take the weights off. That weight, which so easily besets us, I'm just going to tell you what I think it is rather than exegete it. I did the exegesis in my Hebrews paper way back in the day, and I still stick by that. The sin that clings so closely is the sin of scapegoating another. And I saw that frame back in chapter 6 of Hebrews. But you can go read the Jesus-Driven Life Appendix to see why I'm going to read this that way. Run the race with patience. Run it, but run it. Get rid of the weights, that sin that clings so closely, the desire for retribution and retaliation. Get rid of that. And run this race of forgiveness for everything you're worth. Because what's coming to you on the other side, as a result of being a living witness of the demonstration of the love and forgiveness of God to those that scapegoat you, is enormous. It's incredible. It's beyond words. Alrighty, I will let you go for tonight. I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow.